Okay, everybody. So now that we've set up our document, we're going to create a digital watercolor. So, as with all the other assignments, you'll have imported your brush packs into Photoshop. And so now it's just about using those tools to create a digital watercolor. So I'm going to import a reference photo, and I've got my background layer locked, and I've got layer one, and that's where I'm going to place my reference photo. I'll resize it, and that's okay if it doesn't quite go all cover the screen. Also, the resolution doesn't look great, but I'm just using it for reference, so that shouldn't really matter. I'll relayer it reference, and then I can lock that layer down and add a new layer. And I'm going to be toggling that on and off. I'm not going to trace it. I mean, I could trace the mountain shapes, but I'm not too concerned with it looking exactly like this reference. I just want this reference to inform this. So the first layer, we have to think about creating this scene as one would create a watercolor. And watercolor is done in layers. And typically we're working light to dark, back to front, general to specific. So in this case, the layer that would be furthest back would be your sky layer. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to relabel this layer sky. And that's what we'll work on right now. So right now I'm just going to look at those cloud shapes. I do like the cloud shapes, and I could of course sample from this if I wanted to. So as in the previous assignment, I could create a palette layer. Sorry. Sorry about that. I could create a palette layer by just adding this, and then I'll go up here and palette. Not sure why this bar is not going down. It's fine. And what I can do is sample this. So I go to my eyedropper tool, I'll sample this color, and then I can go to my brush tool and I can give myself a, so I can just toggle between I for eyedropper and B for the brush tool to get myself a sample of my cloud or my sky colors. And I'm going from the top here where it's going to be darkest down to the bottom where it's going to be lightest. So sample right on the edge there. So I have a nice little variation. Then I can do some cloud colors. So sample the darkest bellies of the clouds and get a mid-tone, and then maybe find the lightest light, which is essentially white. And that's fine. So now I've got a little palette to play with, and I can just, make a note to um, just say sky. Okay. So now I can turn off my reference photo. I'll turn off my palette layer here in a moment. But the first thing I'm going to do is go up to my brushes. Now you can see once I've imported these brushes, I have a whole lot to choose from. And so those two brush packs that you can download are pretty extensive. I've got some favorite ones, but really like all of these assignments, you're going to have to play with them, look through them, see which ones you like, see which ones are not useful to you, and I would suggest you make notes on which ones work, because as you can see, there's so many that it might be hard to find again. I think the giant, this is the one I like for skies. And so I'll come here, I'm going to turn off my brush layer or my palette layer. Oh, maybe I'll keep that on actually. I can sample from it. And let's sample from my sky color. And I'll go back to my brush. Now I'm going to play with opacity. So I'm going to bring the opacity of the brush down to maybe 50, thereabouts. And the brush size is already at 500. So I'm going to push it up a little bit more because I just want to kind of really lightly suggest. And just like in watercolor, I'm thinking about ever so slightly building these layers. I don't want to go too dark too quickly. I can always go darker. And of course, being digital, there is no really fear of irreversibility like you have with traditional watercolor, but it's nice to go slow. It's also nice to try to think about simulating a traditional watercolor um, to see if you can get those similar effects with a digital tool. So I'm just toggling back and forth between my blues and trying to get a gradient. So darker on top, and we also have these warmer blues on top and lighter towards the horizon line where the mountain's going to be. And so by building this gradient, I'm actually going to push this a little lighter just to really push this idea. The warmer blues are going to be overhead, and the cooler blues are going to be towards the horizon line. And darker values overhead and lighter values towards the horizon line. So you can see here, we're slowly building this gradient. And this brush allows us, you'll notice I'm also dancing around. I'm not painting with any um, continuous passes of the brush. I'm trying to slowly build. Now, right now, I could keep my cloud layer on my sky layer. And the way these watercolor brushes will work is if you're applying these digital pigments onto the same layer, they are going to merge. That's how you're going to get more natural effects. But what we could do is we could create an additional layer above our sky layer for our cloud layer. Um, the results will be a little different, but they should still simulate accurately what you're going for. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to sample my cloud color, go back to my brush. I'm going to toggle back on my reference and just see where those shapes are. I'm also going to make the brush a little smaller for this. Turn the reference back off. And so now I'm just going to insert some of these cloud shapes. I'm going to make it even smaller because I want that density. And I'm trying to think about movement with these cloud shapes. I don't want them, to be boring little puffballs. I want them to have some directionality, thinking about composition. How can I push the viewer into the scene? And I like this clouds coming out from the corner like this. Good directionality. I'm also thinking about other compositional considerations like asymmetrical balance. I don't want to have any of these clouds be too similar to one another. Um, so being mindful of those shapes. I can, at this point, change my opacity, maybe bump it up a little bit so it's a little lighter quicker. And then just having a cloud coming out of this side. When we think about perspective of clouds, remember your clouds are going to be biggest overhead because we're looking at the underside of the cloud shape, and they're going to be towards the horizon, they're going to get thinner and flatter because we're looking at the profile view of those cloud shapes. So just be mindful of how your clouds are formed. I'm also going to be thinking about size. So if I want to suggest a cloud further away, I'm going to use a smaller brush so that I don't have the bulky nature of these clouds. In watercolor, cloud or skies are very quick to make them feel natural. Typically, your best skies are your fastest skies. You add too much pattern, and you can see here, I don't really care for those shapes. Feels too manufactured. So again, thinking about what I've got here with my reference photo, I like this big heavy cloud right here, and then this little cloud here, and then a little bit trailing off here. So I'm going to try to mimic that. Maybe have to make some of these clouds a little smaller. So this cloud I want to bring down, maybe an interesting angle here, and have it go up a little bit more. I think that might be better. And then I'll push back this upper cloud, make it a little smaller. And then this cloud can just be billowing over the mountains. So this might be okay. Then push the opacity up a little bit more to really get those whites. I can also really, so it's so close to white already. Okay. And now what I can do is I can sample from my cloud bellies or my my midtones. And this is how I can get some of those cloud bellies, kind of the weight carrying that water. I can incorporate some of that into this. And that can also help it blend value-wise in with the surrounding, um, which can add nice dimensionality to it. And then I'm going to sample from my darkest color and get some of that depth. And so much of this assignment is just working just this way. We're going to kind of toggle back and forth, slowly building up these shapes. You could, of course, incorporate the idea of a white layer like we've done in previous assignments. Um, Not necessary, but for more complex shapes, that might be something you might want to do. Um, but for this particular piece, seeing as how I have a lot of organic shapes, I'm not so worried about a white layer just because the, uh, the organic shapes can be suggested without being too perfect. And to bring this shape up a little bit. So you can see we're just slowly building dimensionality and playing with our palette and our skies. So let's see. Now I've probably come back with the blue and I can start negatively painting and maybe carving in to these clouds a little bit just to give them, I don't want them to be too perfect. So show some irregularity where the clouds kind of turn into vapor and just kind of blend right back into the sky. And so I don't want them to be too solid feeling. And I'm being mindful of the blue that I select so that, I can still have that atmospheric perspective where we're going to have darker blues up here and lighter blues down lower. Switch to my blues. I can carve in to this one a little bit. So it's kind of nice. Unlike traditional watercolor, with digital watercolor, we can sculpt, and we're basically sculpting back and forth. So this is where, it's not very much like traditional watercolor because we don't have this kind of control in traditional watercolor. You're forced to do it all the first time, and um, that can be challenging. This is looking pretty good. Um, I'm going to carve out the bottom of these clouds a little bit better, some lighter blue or some darker blues, so we can see the separation of shape between the cloud form and the sky. And you can mix in here and there just to feel variety of blues. A little white pocket here and there. And then, of course, we can come all the way down. It doesn't really matter because we're going to put land over that, right? But yeah, that's probably good for now. So that's our cloud shape. So what I can do now, if I wanted to, I could lock these down and I could add another layer above that. And maybe I'll turn these off for a second, look at my reference. So now I've got the sky shape kind of figured out. Now, with this next shape, thinking back to front, I would probably want to explore putting in the mountain. So what I could do if I'm concerned about it, which I'm not, but I could come in here and just maybe switch out of that brush for a moment, give myself, a very basic line, and maybe I'll sample. So I'll sample a brown or something like that from here. And then on my mountain shape, I'll just give myself the profile of, in this case, Mount Shasta, and just to see where that mountain is. The other thing that I could do if I wanted to is I can come in here and I could, you know, map out some of my snow shapes. Although those are so random and, seasonally dependent that it doesn't really matter. I can make that stuff up. But remember that the snow shapes and the contours of those snow shapes do tell us about the slope of the mountain. And so they are important directionally to give us that sense of height and size of this 14,000-foot mountain. So I don't need to have it perfect, but just giving myself some basic guide to go by so that when I toggle things back on, I have, some place to go. So what I can do now is I could actually do a fill. Let's see, as long as my lines come out the sides, which they do, and then I could just fill this shape, right? And then I could come in and I can um, modify that. And so probably what I would want to do instead of filling it with that color is I'd fill it with something a little bit, I don't know, maybe light gray. I'll take my bucket tool um, and dump it on there. So let's see. Bucket tool. There you go. And then I can come in with whatever paintbrush I want to use. I probably wouldn't use the same one that I was using. And so maybe I'll play around with selecting a different watercolor brush for this next stage. And we can come in and I could create another palette layer if I wanted to, sampling from that reference photo. And right, I can come in here and I can add to my palette layer. So I'll come back to my palette layer and maybe I'll sample here and let's see here, brush here, dropper. Let's see some white. You can see that just even though we know it's dirt, a lot of these colors on this mountain are really blue and gray. So it's an important thing to remember that the color you think something is may not be the color that it actually is. For instance, look at the snow. Maybe in some of the lightest spots, the snow is actually white, but for the most part, the snow is gray and blue. And so, sampling from a smattering of places just to get myself a diverse palette. And then, of course, I can just give myself mountain idea. Okay, so now I can turn back on my mountain shape and I could sample directly from my mountain palette. And so we can do that. Sample that from here, and I can just fill this in quickly. Larger brush. And what I'd probably do is create a little gradient, so I don't even have to. Um, and then, of course, what I could do is I could create masks here, clipping masks, so that I don't have um, to worry about going into my sky shape, right? So all I would do to do that is select my, get rid of this stuff for a second. Um, I could select the layer and then I could go to my selection tool or my magic wand tool, select that, and then mask off the area that I don't want to go into. So let's see, I think that is incorrect. So what I'll do is I'll do an inverse selection. So inverse the selection, and that'll select this, and then I can mask that off. And that way it will not allow me go into the sky. It'll force me to stay in my mountain shape. And then I can basically do the same thing. Select a color. Maybe this will be my base color, nice and light. And then when I come in, I can paint, but it will not go into my sky shape, right? So very nice feature. And so by no means complete, but at this point we could turn back on our sky, right? Turn off our reference, and you can see the piece starting to come together. So you're going to continue this way, building a well-developed watercolor painting, thinking about layers, thinking about your masks, and um, your goal is to try, after reviewing some traditional watercolors, try to emulate the characteristics of a watercolor with your digital tools. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out and have fun.